Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. And it is time for a tier list where I go over the core studio albums of an artist or a band, and I basically tier those records in their album catalog out, with S being the most epic tier and F being the worst tier, though this is a Led Zeppelin tier list, so I doubt we will have anything to do with that F or even that E, but I'm not going to continue to spoil this video. All right, Led Zeppelin, legendary hard rock outfit from the UK, one of the most consistently good, creative, exciting, thrilling, explosive, and influential bands of all time. Incredibly solid discography, which fans have disagreed for years as to which one of their albums is the best album, and I'm sure that this video will stir some conversation around that, as I have some particular opinions on some particular albums in the Led Zeppelin discog. So without any further ado, let's rank these albums out, starting with their debut record and going all the way to In Through the Outdoor. We're not going to cover Coda, as that album is mostly just some leftovers and some alternate takes, so on and so forth. So let's just focus on the good stuff, the important stuff. Led Zeppelin, debut album, Led Zeppelin I, the first one, came out in 1969. The iconic cover of the Zeppelin going down in a ball of flames. What do I think about this album? I think it's a good record. I think it's a solid record. I think there are a lot of great tracks on this one. And like every Led Zeppelin album, there are some incredible classics on here, whether you're talking about Good Times, Bad Times, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, Communication Breakdown, which is one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs of all time, and who can forget Dazed and Confused? Robert Plant's vocal performances on that track are insane. Also, that very sinister, wailing guitar lead that Jimmy Page plays all over that track. So Led Zeppelin I. I think it's a very good record. If there's anything that holds this album back, it's that not every song on the project is exciting. I do think that at this stage in their career, really the first two Led Zeppelin albums, the band is still sounding pretty rough around the edges and blemished at this point. Clearly, the performances on this record were not perfect. The production on this album is not perfect. And there are some elements of Led Zeppelin's songwriting still at this point that I think are in an incubator stage. I mean, look, the previous experience of everyone in the band, especially Jimmy Page with Yardbirds and so on and so forth, put Led Zeppelin in a position where when they arrived on the scene with this record, it was almost like they were fully formed. You know, there wasn't really kind of like that period where they needed to grow exponentially in order to show you what they were all about. Like, they came to us with this revolutionary, groundbreaking hard rock sound right out of the gate, and that's an incredible thing. You know, it's contributed to the band's amazing success. Still, having said that, in the grander scheme of Led Zeppelin's discography, there are better records, more solid track lists, better, quality production, which is why Led Zeppelin, the debut, is good, but not my favorite, not the most high-tiered record in the band's catalog, in my opinion. Still very enjoyable, though. Still great, and I understand and, give credence to arguments that it is the best or someone's favorite record in the Led Zeppelin catalog. So Led Zeppelin, debut, I would put it solidly in the B category, which is not a bad thing. B is very enjoyable, very solid tier. I know some of y'all might be mad at that, but that's fine. That's fine. It's a positive, nothing but love sort of tier, in my opinion. It's once you really start getting past C that you're talking about doo-doo. Now, Led Zeppelin II, second record, Number Dos, came out actually the same year, just months later. And as a result of this, a lot of the pros as well as the cons of Led Zeppelin I also carry over onto Led Zeppelin II. Like, the performances, the production is very raw. They're not perfect. Occasionally, Jimmy Page's fast, fluttery guitar solos sound a little messy. Occasionally, Robert Plant is really going all out in a way where you're just like, wow, man, you're really just like going for it. Occasionally there are moments where the production, like on Heartbreaker, where the bass just sounds really overdriven and fat and kind of a little wonky, almost like out of pitch with the guitar in a way. As great as a song like Heartbreaker is, one thing that I will give this record is that it's a lot less, in my opinion, derivative than Led Zeppelin 1, which is another thing that kind of works against that record, as there are a lot of kind of classic ideas and lines and lyrical tropes from the blues back catalog that the band is kind of just really just blatantly stealing and just kind of riffing on and extending and just showing off and just doing dramatic musical poses on top of, which is very much what Led Zeppelin was about in the first leg of their career. That's kind of their thing. That's what they did. But again, there's more original songwriting, in my opinion, on Led Zeppelin II. There are better riffs. There are more explosive performances. It seems like the band was getting to a point where everything was solidifying a bit more, even if the record came out in a very short amount of time after the debut. More tracks on this one that I think are fantastic, or at least are some of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs, whether you're talking about Whole Lotta Love. Again, as wonky as the bass is, I love Heartbreaker. Lovin', say that the woman, which is maybe one of the most ridiculous, but also one of my most favorite Led Zeppelin hooks of all time. Who can't love the that extended, lengthy, just redonkulous drum solo on Moby Dick? Bring It On Home is a solid track too. And Ramble On is, one of the many tasteful, folkier tracks in the Led Zeppelin catalog in the first leg of their career. So a lot of great tracks on this one. A little more solid than the debut, in my opinion, though. Again, sharing a lot of the same characteristics as that album, which once more is not surprising, considering the length of time between these two albums. So the band's first two records, really first leg of their career, falling solidly in that B category for me. Very good records, but I think the band went on from there to put out better stuff. Moving on to Led Zeppelin III, which dropped a year later, and you can really tell the amount of time and the way the band was able to kind of appreciate in skill and also bring some better production into the fold as well, because the songs on Led Zeppelin III are produced immaculately. I think they went on to produce even better sounding tracks after this, but in comparison with 1 and 2, the performances are just spot on from front to back. The folk tracks sound dynamic and crisp and beautiful, lots of space. The more aggressive tracks like Immigrant Song are explosive. Oh my God, that riff. Like, it's still to this day sounds like one of the most just bombastic rock riffs of all time. And that a great deal of that has to do with just how well this album is produced. So a lot of those rougher sounds and production qualities from the first two records are smoothed out. The performance blemishes from the first two records are smoothed out. I think that the songwriting on this one is a lot less derivative too. I mean, obviously the blues still play a huge role in influencing Led Zeppelin's songwriting, but I think that the band is moving into more original territory on this record as well. I also think the quality gap between the folkier and more mellow songs on this record and the hard rock tracks on this record closed quite a bit. But still, once more, I think this is not Led Zeppelin's most ambitious project. I think they did go on to put out some better stuff, but still, I think this is quite an improvement. I would put 3 solidly in that A category. All right, moving on from there. Led Zeppelin's next record, which dropped in 1971. Led Zeppelin's fourth, essentially self-titled album, which we have right over here. This record is awesome. This record kicks freaking ass. So many amazing songs on this album. The production is even better than it was on 3. And Black Dog. Also classic tracks like Rock and Roll. Stairway to Heaven. I mean, you can't really outdo Stairway to Heaven. It's kind of Stairway to Heaven, you know what I mean? Also, When the Levee Breaks. Oh my God, what a closer. This is just another solid, direct, 40-minute straightforward album from Led Zeppelin, but I think as far as that formula goes, this is really where they perfected that. You know, I think the band went on to do weirder and more experimental stuff from here, and I think that they were kind of aware that, okay, I think there's only so much we can do with this format, which is why they started branching out and doing different things after this point. But still, 4 is pretty much like just the quintessential hard rock album, in my opinion. And it just has to do with just how flawless the performances are, how amazing every single track is, how some of Led Zeppelin's best songs, really some of the best rock songs of all time, are on this album, no question. And the performances are fantastic too. You know, with each project, the performances get better and better and better. And as far as straightforward hard rock albums go, I don't really think it gets much better than 4. You know, not only in the Led Zeppelin catalog, but just in general. You know, 4 is, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, hard rock album of all time. You know, let's just move on to the next one, as I think the greatness of 4 mostly speaks for itself. Now, Houses of the Holy is Led Zeppelin's next full-length album, which came out in 1973. So they took some time with this one. And, you know, you can really tell because this record is one of the more out there Led Zeppelin albums. It is celebrated by many. It is loved by many. And, you know, I could see why. There are some amazing songs on this one. I mean, No Quarter is great. Song Remains the Same is good. Also, The Ocean is amazing. However, some of my least favorite Led Zeppelin songs are on this record, and the tracks outside of those, you know, most notable singles from the Led Zeppelin catalog, or most legendary songs, just kind of hit me as a little bland or a little underwhelming. I mean, the band's attempt at trying to do a funk song with the crunge, as well as a reggae song later into the track list too, do not sit well with me. I know that many people consider Houses of the Holy to be one of the band's best, nearly a perfect record. It is certainly a favorite of some Led Zeppelin fans. It is not for me, though I would not say it's like awful. I would probably put it in the C category. But you know, it's just my personal feelings, it's my personal thoughts. You can hate it and dislike it, and that's fine. But that's really how I feel about this record. I mean, arguably some amazing tracks on it. Also some of my least favorite Led Zeppelin songs. Other tracks that just hit me as okay. But as far as the C category goes, this album is probably going to be the best one. Let's just move on to the next one. Physical Graffiti. Physical freaking Graffiti. Some would argue this is Led Zeppelin's last great record, last amazing record. I guess maybe you could say that. Came out in 1975, so a little ways after Houses of the Holy. And yeah, this record is fantastic. This record is amazing. This is another Led Zeppelin album in the catalog that I don't really have that much critical to say, despite the fact that this album is 80 minutes long. And in my opinion, those are 80 goddamn flawless minutes. The production on this thing kicks fucking ass. There's so many fresh, funky, groovin', and insane sounds all over this album. From the start track, Custard Pie, to also Kashmir. Jesus Christ. Kashmir is probably one of the most well-produced rock songs of all time. One of the most epic rock songs of all time. Da-na-na, 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 da-da-da, ba-ba-ba. Those strings, goddamn. It was rare during that time that a string section worked into a rock track so well. And sure, there are plenty of other examples that you could cite, like the Beatles, but Led Zeppelin just keeps this amazing groove and pace with that string section. The strings don't really take away from how hard and aggressive and explosive the song is. I would say it really only adds to that. So I don't know. That's one of many fantastic examples of great songs on this record, which again, there's 80 minutes of material on this thing. And every track just kicks ass. I don't know what else to say about this track. I mean, In My Time of Dying is fantastic. Black Country Woman is a little weird toward the end with those acoustic guitars and Robert Plant whining about getting a beer thrown in his face and everything, but still, the track is kind of tongue-in-cheek and funny. I just don't really have anything negative to say about this record. I think every song in the track list itself is just so versatile and dynamic. So much ground is covered across this record, and some of the just creative use of effects and synths occasionally here and there adds so much to the album too. Led Zeppelin really branching out on this one. It's amazing to get this incredible night and day difference between the band's debut and this record over here, which some may see as a kind of indulgent. Yeah, it is an indulgent album, but I think it's through that indulgence that Led Zeppelin explores some really incredible territory on this one. So honestly, I would put this one in the S tier too. I think Physical Graffiti is an amazing album. I think it's one of the greatest rock albums of all time. I would say it's just as solid as 4. Obviously, I think I appreciate Physical Graffiti for its length and its ambition, and I think there's elements of that you might put over Led Zeppelin 4, but still, Led Zeppelin 4 is fantastic for being as straightforward and as hard-hitting and as direct as it is. Physical Graffiti is more of, I guess I'll say, a journey. Let's move on past this album, which once you get into this leg of Led Zeppelin's discography, post Physical Graffiti, Led Zeppelin, a lot of fans turn a deaf ear, almost as if Led Zeppelin stopped coming out with any worthwhile stuff. And that's honestly just not true. So we have Led Zeppelin Presence, their 1976 album, which there is some stuff about this record that is not as good as it could have been, because as the story goes, Robert Plant, at this point in the band's career, had been in a car crash, and he was injured performing out of a wheelchair during at least some of the sessions of this album. And I don't know what it is. Was it him sitting? Was it still him dealing with trauma post the car crash? I don't know, but his vocals aren't totally where they would be expected to be, given how great his vocal performances have been on pretty much every Led Zeppelin album up until this point. There are moments on this record where even his voice is a bit more buried in the mix than you would want Robert Plant to be. Also, Presence sees Led Zeppelin reeling back a little bit, reeling it in a little bit, as this album is not so much breaking any ground or experimenting or writing songs in a new, novel, refreshing way. It's pretty much continuing a lot of the sounds and a lot of the riffs and the bombacity that the band had achieved on their past couple of records, though it seems like a lot of the experimentation seems to melt away. This album is not nearly as adventurous as Physical. It's not nearly as adventurous as Houses of the Holy. But still, there are good songs on this one. There's good songwriting on this one. The production is really solid as well. So, even if Plant's voice is not the best that it is on every other Led Zeppelin album, it's still decent. And even if there isn't as much wild experimentation on this record as there is on other albums, the performances, as far as the drums, the guitars, the bass, are still really good. The writing is still very good. The riffs are quality. I would not, diss this record or throw it in the trash or anything like that. I would encourage the Led Zeppelin fans to give it a try. I put it solidly in the C category. It's not terrible. It's not terrible at all. It's not terrible by any stretch of the imagination. And honestly, I don't think Led Zeppelin ever came out with a record that was complete garbage. So I think that already kind of spoils my thoughts on In Through the Outdoor, which I will also place into the C category. But still, I like the record quite a bit. It's not a bad album at all. There are a lot of good tracks on this record. I could see why some Led Zeppelin fans ignore this one. There's a lot of synths on it. It's easily Led Zeppelin's probably most pop-centric, most commercially friendly sound they've ever drummed up in their entire discography. And even though Led Zeppelin most certainly already at this point laid down the groundwork for the era of hard rock and hair metal to come after the 70s. You know, at this point already, you were not going to get a Guns N' Roses. You were not going to get a Van Halen without first a Led Zeppelin. But I feel like a record like In Through the Outdoor just further solidifies that musical lineage with the friendlier guitar tones and with those synthesizers that are on a lot of tracks here, which sound very smooth. Between that opening guitar riff and the drum beat and the synthesizers on In the Evening, the opening track to this one, I mean, it just sounds like a freaking new wave song. You know, it just sounds like a new wave song, or what would be a new wave rock song to come just a handful of years later. So, you know, as rough and maybe as I don't know, a little cringe-inducing as a few of the sounds on this album may be, because you're like, oh, I'm not used to Led Zeppelin sounding this way. Why does this sound like a pop band? Da, 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 da. You have to give this record a lot of credit for being ahead of the curve and really kind of setting the stage for a lot of the rock and pop music to come shortly after. It actually wouldn't be until the mid-'80s that some hard rock and progressive rock groups that Led Zeppelin were contemporaries of, like Yes, would actually embrace these sounds of synth pop and new wave. Led Zeppelin were, it seems, even ahead of the curve on that, at least a little bit. I would not discount this album. I would not write this album off. I would not throw this album into the dustbin of history, especially since I think its influence rippled on pretty far. The band, even though they didn't come out with another record past this point with the sudden and tragic passing of John Bonham, they were certainly onto something with this record. They were on the verge of something that a lot of other artists would take the torch on and continue forward with, but who knows what could have developed from here had they continued using synths and writing music that was maybe just a little bit hookier and catchier, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So I'm going to leave it at that. That has been our Led Zeppelin tier list here, with 4 and Physical Graffiti in S. Love those. Perfect, if not nearly perfect albums. Love 3 in the A tier. We have 1 and 2 in B. House is the Holy, Presence, In Through the Outdoor in the C tier, and everything else is completely left empty, because Led Zeppelin, in my opinion, has never come out with a god-awful album, an album that's not worth listening to, not worth trying. Great tracks on every single album, just kind of different sounds, different flavors, different sounds, different styles, different eras, I guess you could say, in their career, even though all of these records occurred within a relatively short period of time. There's a lot of material within the span of time that Led Zeppelin dropped it. So, you know, amazing, fantastic stuff. And let me know your thoughts down in the comments where you would tier and rank these albums. I'm sure I will hear about that. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Led Zeppelin, forever.